I've got a question for you. Have you ever found yourself thinking, I like retro shooters like Dusk and a Medieval, but I really wish there was a 90s throwback shooter that would let me fight a mutated version of the former leader of communist Czechoslovakia, Klement Gottwald? Well, now you can stop crying yourself to sleep every night because I found the perfect game for you. Alright, seriously, I just learned about this early access retro shooter from a review on G-Man Live's channel, in which he called it Czechquake. Now, within a few minutes of watching the gameplay footage, I realized that I had to try this, and not just because I love 90s shooters, but because this game really struck a chord with me. The game's called Hrot, which is Czech for spike or apex, or well, at least I'm pretty sure it is. My Czech is a bit rusty. It's kind of one of the more intense Slavic languages.
333 stříbrných ptáků přeletělo přes 333 stříbrných střech.
Yeah, you get the idea. Anyway, most of you who are familiar with my work know that I spent many years abroad in Russia and Ukraine. But what you may not know, dear viewer, is that I also lived in the Czech Republic for about half a year studying and working in Prague and some of the nearby towns. I almost returned for a job in 2020, but of course that was the year when all our travel plans were canceled, especially for those of us living in the country that rapidly became Grandfather Nurgle's garden of disease and pestilence. Prague is a wonderful city, beautiful architecture, reasonable prices on delicious cuisine and fantastic beer, rich cultural history, and a vibrant nightlife, which for me will forever be associated with throwing up in a trash can in Karlovy Lazny, the biggest club in Central Europe. Normally I'd say something about fond memories here, but there's kind of a lot of missing time from that night. So in case it's not perfectly clear, I really like Praha. So when I saw a game that obviously takes place in the Czech capital, it instantly appealed to my sense of nostalgia. But it's not just about the personal connection. The game really does play a lot like Quake, but with some interesting twists. The game takes place in an alternate 1986 after an unspecified disaster in the nearby Soviet Union. It's Chernobyl. Your character starts out in a civil defense bomb shelter and is armed with a defective gas mask and a VZ-52 pistol. The Zbrojovka Brno VZ-52, my first and only handgun. This thing is a real work of art, a Czech design analog to the Soviet 7.62 by 25 TT-33 Tokarev, but like most weapons the Soviets made, the Czechs made it better. Seeing this thing finally appear in a video game is beautiful. Anyway, you start out at Kosmonautu metro station, and must work your way through seemingly abandoned cities, sewers, standard FPS fare. The color palettes are a bit dull and drab, but I was impressed by the devs' abilities to recreate the look of period Eastern Bloc architecture in a way that's easily recognizable despite the retro graphics. This gives the game a gloomy, depressing, and at times very unnerving atmosphere, especially considering how easily you can be ambushed. It's difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced it how Eastern Bloc architecture and aesthetics can be so intimidating at times. The artistic game It's Winter, which faithfully recreates a typical Russian neighborhood, doesn't even have any enemies, but it still feels like a horror game. Hrot definitely has a touch of that, and I'd also say it's got a Silent Hill vibe to it, especially considering some of the bizarre enemies you'll meet. The game captures classic Quake movement perfectly. Your player character is fast, although your jump is a bit low for my liking. One nice feature is that you don't really have to crouch to go through vents and small passages. The game just handles that automatically. Also, unlike Quake, there's a lot more interactivity. It's not quite as much as Dusk, where you can pick up and throw just about any object, but you can do things like use closed-circuit TV monitors, flush toilets, and use a playground carousel to do something like this. Highly amusing. As far as weapons go, there's nothing particularly groundbreaking, at least in terms of function. You've got your VZ-52 pistol, a VZ-25 submachine gun, another classic Czech weapon that you pretty much never see in games. You've got a standard pump-action shotgun, a rocket launcher, a literal Hussite Wars era hand cannon, and finally there's a lightning gun a la Quake. Your melee weapon is a sickle, but unfortunately it's extremely weak. You can also lob grenades, and there are these landmines, although they aren't really too useful. Now, speaking of weaknesses, I'm going to spend a little time on this because this is an early access game, and if there's enough feedback, hopefully we'll see some improvements when the full release does come. In general, virtually all my complaints are identical to the ones identified in G-Man Live's review, but I'll summarize them in my own words here. First is sound. Enemies don't all have an alert sound, so sometimes you get blindsided by an enemy that's spotted you and has been walking around for a while without you even noticing. But more importantly, all the gun sound effects need to be a lot louder and harder. It's been more than 20 years since I fired my old VZ-52 pistol, but the one thing I'll never forget is how loud that thing is in an indoor range. In this game it sounds like a cap gun, and the submachine gun sounds like a woodpecker. so stronger, louder sounds would be a big improvement. Next is ammo. After watching that review and playing the game, I noticed that at times ammo for some of your basic weapons is pretty rare, unless you're actively hunting for secrets, which this game spells secret for some reason. The weird thing is I found myself having plenty of ammo, even rockets, near the end of the episode, but I had to be conservative in some of the middle levels. This limits your ability to really enjoy those big arena fights against large groups of enemies. I had a similar issue with health pickups as well. Also, some of the ammo is labeled in a way that makes it hard to keep track of what you're picking up. You can pick up bullets, but also clips, and it's not immediately obvious which are for your pistol and which are for your submachine gun. Also, in the first episode, some of the exit level switches look like ordinary switches, so a lot of times I'd find myself accidentally exiting the level when I wanted to keep exploring. It would be good if there was something to indicate when you're actually at the end of the level. Lastly, there's the issue of reloading, which is handled much like Duke Nukem 3D and Shadow Warrior. That's to say there's no manual reload, but rather your player reloads automatically whenever the gun runs dry. In Duke Nukem 3D, only the pistol was like this, so it wasn't a big deal. In this game, your pistol and machine gun need to be reloaded, and as you can't do a tactical reload, it leads to some pretty irritating situations when you're faced with a charging enemy out of nowhere. Personally, I think they should be consistent and just get rid of reloading for that classic Quake feel. Also, I have to say there is one more minor flaw. This game actually gives you a recipe for beef stroganoff, which is a bit disappointing because they could have provided something like Czech goulash or svichkova na smetane. I realize not everyone can get their hands on huska bread to go with these, but you could always substitute with potatoes. That's about all I can say. I breezed through it pretty quickly, so I'm glad they included an endless horde mode as well. But even this mode could be improved with some periodic ammo and health drops. Interestingly enough, after playing through the initial campaign, I noticed that your character is more or less progressing through Prague along the red metro line, roughly south to north. And if my check's still good enough, right before the final boss there's a warning that tells you not to go to the tower, which I'm assuming refers to Prague's iconic TV tower. There's also a funny reference to the fate of Klement Gottwald's corpse. I won't spoil the story for you, but basically the Czechoslovakian Communist Party tried to preserve his body in a mausoleum like the Russians did with Lenin, and it didn't go too well. It may look pretty simple at the moment, but the game really goes far in capturing the feel of Quake, while also providing a tense, disturbing atmosphere as you fight your way through an East Bloc ghost town. It's a game with a unique theme and aesthetic, and I hope it piques people's curiosity to learn more about the real history that inspired this dark vision. I hope we'll see more improvements and additions in the near future. Please give us a VZ58. Please. Well, that's the end of the review. Thanks for watching. I ask you to click like and subscribe as always, and check the description below for my Patreon page where you can support my work. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.